Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a title that arrived with absolutely massive expectations. 007 First Light. Developed by the exact same studio behind the incredibly acclaimed Hitman World of Assassination, this game promised us a brand new origin story for James Bond. And honestly, the pitch was wildly ambitious. They wanted to blend stealth, high-octane action, exploration, all those iconic gadgets, and cinematic storytelling into one seamless package. But, as we're going to see throughout this analysis, trying to deliver on a promise that huge presents some seriously fascinating design hurdles.
So let's dive right into the core question here because it really sets the stage for everything we're about to look at. Can one single game master three entirely different genres at once? The developers really set out to capture the magic of multiple industry-leading franchises. But in game design, every single choice requires a trade-off. What actually happens when you try to be a stealth sandbox, an action blockbuster, and an exploration adventure literally all at the exact same time?
Well, that brings us to the core thesis of our explainer today. There's a quote that hits the nail on the head. First Light is a good game that frequently reminds players of great games. It's an ambitious experience, right? And it absolutely succeeds when it comes to presentation and atmosphere. But as we start peeling back the layers, we'll see it kind of struggles to match the shared gameplay depth of the specific franchises it draws its inspiration from.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the identity problem.
So the game's central flaw is that First Light tries to occupy three totally distinct design spaces simultaneously. First, you've got the systemic stealth sandbox of Hitman, which is all about patience and player-driven simulation. Second, the cinematic action spectacle of Uncharted, think tight pacing and heavily scripted explosive action. And third, the exploration and traversal of Tomb Raider, focusing heavily on puzzles and survival. First Light borrows pieces from all three, but here's the catch. Because each of these genres demands entirely different gameplay priorities, the game never fully commits to any single philosophy. It often feels like a compromise.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 2, falling short of Hitman.
Because both franchises come from the exact same developer, the expectations for the stealth in this game were just sky high. In Hitman, NPC schedules create these incredibly believable living worlds. Disguises completely change how you interact with the map, and messing with the environment leads to these wildly emergent, unexpected outcomes. But in First Light, those mechanics are seriously dialed back. Disguises are a lot simpler, the NPC routines just aren't as dynamic, and the stealth encounters usually have really obvious, intended solutions. Instead of a deep sandbox, you're frequently funneled right toward a scripted outcome. The stealth is functional, for sure, but it's just missing that deep, rewarding simulation.
And this heavily impacts the mission design. One of the absolute best things about a game like Hitman is how it lets you create your own stories. Like a blown assassination attempt can lead to a completely chaotic, unexpected chain of events. But First Light relies heavily on trigger-based progression, scripted revelations, and predetermined action sequences. There's really limited room for you to just improvise. Now, to be fair, this heavily authored approach does make for a fantastic cinematic pace. Your first playthrough is going to be a blast, but it takes a massive toll on the game's replayability.
This is compounded by the game's enemy AI. Our sources point out predictable patrol routes, simplified search behaviors, and really inconsistent awareness states. Look, in a stealth mission, tension is literally everything. But when you can easily spot exploitable patterns and enemies aren't really communicating with each other, that tension just totally evaporates.
Moving on, let's look at the other pillars in Section 3, Uncharted and Tomb Raider.
This whole identity crisis extends to the game's pacing too. Uncharted is famous because every single action, traversal, and story sequence feeds into the next. It uses those massive cinematic moments to elevate the gameplay itself. First Light, however, really struggles with consistency here. It often treats its gameplay sequences as just a bridge, like just a way to walk you to the next cinematic cutscene. While First Light has brilliant framing and gorgeous globe-trotting locations, the set pieces rarely hit that Uncharted level of jaw-dropping spectacle, and the action sequences end up feeling kind of disconnected from the actual gameplay systems.
And we see a very similar disconnect with the physics and movement. Visually, Bond looks incredible. The animations as you transition from running to crouching to combat are buttery smooth. But responsiveness kind of takes a back seat to making it look like a movie. The character momentum feels artificially assisted, and the movement just lacks that heavy, grounded weight you'd expect. Even in combat, and don't get me wrong, the weapons look and sound great, the enemy reactions prioritize flash over realism. You're going to see a lot of inconsistent hit reactions and pretty predictable ragdolls, which means it misses out on that desperate, gritty tension you find in modern action leaders.
Let's put the exploration into perspective by comparing it directly to Tomb Raider. Notice how First Light's traversal sections are pretty shallow by comparison.
Where Tomb Raider gives you high traversal depth and strong puzzle complexity, First Light sits at just moderate and limited. The environmental interaction drops way down from expensive to basic. Honestly, the climbing often feels more automated than tactile. Traversal here is used to manage pacing rather than giving you true gameplay mastery, so you rarely get that genuine, deep sense of discovery.
So what does this all mean for the environmental design? Basically, First Light gives you beautiful sets, but it's missing systemic depth. There are fewer interconnected NPC behaviors, very limited chain reactions, and way less room for meaningful gadget experimentation. The places you visit look absolutely stunning, but after you spend a few hours with it, you start to realize they function a lot more like Hollywood movie sets than dynamic, living simulations.
But hey, it's not all critiques. Let's pivot to Section 4, Capturing the Bond Fantasy.
Because despite the mechanical shortcomings we just talked about, First Light has some absolutely phenomenal strengths. The presentation is just top tier, with incredible art direction that drips with excellent James Bond atmosphere. Plus, it's much more approachable and faster paced than a dense, complex game like Hitman, which is a huge win for newcomers. The developers brilliantly captured that slick international espionage vibe. You've got the stylish gadgets, the infiltration, that classic cinematic 007 feel. All of this ensures the game is still a wildly entertaining ride.
Which brings us to our conclusion, Section 5, the final verdict.
The ultimate takeaway here is that First Light is a hybrid design sacrificing depth for breadth. The game's biggest limitation actually isn't poor execution. It's that divided identity we outlined right at the start. By trying to be a systemic stealth sandbox, a cinematic action blockbuster, and an exploration adventure all at once, it sacrifices the deep mastery that made its inspiration so legendary in the first place.
For Bond fans, there is no doubt it delivers a highly polished espionage adventure with all the franchise appeal you could want. But to quote the review directly, for players seeking the emerging complexity of Hitman, the spectacle of Uncharted, or the exploration of Tomb Raider, the experience may feel ambitious but ultimately constrained by its hybrid design choices. It really is a jack of all trades, but a master of none.
Which leaves us with this final, pretty provocative thought to chew on. In modern gaming, where player expectations are just impossibly high, is it better for a developer to master one single genre and execute it flawlessly? Or is it worth sacrificing that mechanical depth to be a jack of all trades and deliver a much wider cinematic experience? Think about what you value most the next time you pick up a controller. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the design behind your favorite experiences.